Millions of refugees in Europe have fled the war in Syria. The UN say talks are the only way to end the conflict, but preparations for Friday's peace negotiations in Geneva have been beset by problems. The latest round of talks are expected to last 6 months, and the hope is they'll lead to a nationwide ceasefire. But the United Nations has faced several obstacles, not least the difficulties in delivering aid to besieged areas.
The people in Syria cannot be blamed on the humanitarian organisations and staff. It is the failure of both the parties and the international community that have allowed this conflict to continue for far too long. And try as we may, humanitarian action cannot be a substitute for political action. The only solution is through political dialogue that reduces and ultimately ends the violence. The key stakeholders in the Syria crisis must do what has never been done up to this point and put people before politics.
Now, Zeina Awad has been following the preparations for these talks while covering the human impact of the war. She joins us now from the southern Turkish city of Gaziantep, close to the Syrian border. Zeina, talks are due to start tomorrow. Who are the big players who have accepted an invite, and who are the important players we've yet to hear from?
Well, the High Negotiations Committee is one of those we are still waiting to hear a final answer from. They're meeting as we speak in Riyadh. Saudi Arabia is their biggest backer. They have already sent a letter to the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon saying that their participation depends on the Syrian regime lifting a siege of a number of areas and on the ability on bombardments stopping. The one party that we know will be at the table, that's confirmed, is that of Bashar al-Assad. He's sending one of his most trusted men, his foreign minister, Walid al-Ma'alem, who will be leading a delegation. We also know that the Syrian Democratic Council will be there. That's a coalition of Kurdish, secular Arab and Christian groups who are fighting, with one omission, and that's the PYD. There's been a lot of controversy over the presence or lack of the PYD. It is in control of northeastern parts of Syria. Russia says it should be at the table. Turkey says it should not, and that is because its armed wing is considered to be too close to the PKK. Of course, the PKK is an armed Kurdish group here in Turkey that's considered to be a terrorist one by the EU, by the US, and by Turkey. So still a lot of controversy, a lot of back and forth. I'm sure we'll be hearing more on who will be attending. And once they are there, we understand that they'll be in separate rooms. The UN will be conducting some form of shuttle diplomacy, if you will, between them. And the goal in the immediate is to reach some form of a ceasefire so humanitarian aid organizations can actually do their job and deliver aid on the ground.
And Zeina, you're there on the border between Syria and Turkey. Just give us a sense of the humanitarian cost of the war at the moment.
Well, it's really been a disaster for the Syrian people. The UN has been critical of all parties, especially when it comes to issues of access. But in the last day, we've seen the Assad regime be targeted from the UN. We understand from Stephen O'Brien, who's UN Emergency Relief Coordinator, that there used to be 15 areas that are besieged. Now it's up to 18. We also know that most of the UN's requests from the Syrian regime to access those areas have actually been turned down. The UN says there are 13.5 million people inside of Syria, a staggering number really, who are in desperate need of help. Now, since this conflict began, the Syrian people have faced hunger, they've faced mass displacement and mass killings.
Starvation. A new normal for a country that once prided itself on being agriculturally self-sufficient. These images from Madaya in Syria's southern mountainous region shocked the world when they emerged earlier in January. Men, women and children starving, left to survive on water, spices and leaves. No food was allowed in for 6 months during a siege of the town by President Bashar al-Assad's regime, backed by the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah. But even when there is food, there's almost never any security. Human rights organizations say every party to the conflict is to blame. Daesh has imposed its harsh rule in the east. Assad regime forces are battling rebel groups on the ground, and airstrikes are pounding down. Russia has been singled out in particular for its indiscriminate targeting of hospitals and residential neighborhoods. More than 250,000 Syrians have been killed so far. Countless others are missing. At least 10 million are now displaced, many of them within their own country. And the exodus goes on. Thousands of Syrians try to flee every month, braving the long and dangerous journey across borders in search of safety. Zeina Awad, TRT World.